Many observers, Chinese and foreigner alike, argue that China's domestic woes and external adversity, particularly trade talks with the U.S., look like our second entry into the WTO or another round of opening up. And the deliberation of the annual NPC session will be first and foremost the landmark Foreign Investment Law Bill. A skeptical U.S. says Chinese lawmakers will rush the law into action ahead of the next summit meeting with President Trump. But the Chinese tend to adopt a holistic view. They keep an eye on the impact of the supply-side reform and prevention of systematic financial risks, AI-driven innovation, and our sustainability. This means our green development and real integration to pursue a more inclusive world economic order. How do we assess reforms and further opening up? Today, sitting with me in the studio are Mr. Yan Se, Associate Professor of Economics at the Guanghua School of Management in Peking University, and Mr. Liu Zhiqin, Senior Fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies in Renmin University of China. We shall also speak to Dr. Shao Yu in Shanghai. He is the Chief Economist and Deputy CEO of Orion Securities Company Limited. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. It's a special edition of Voices and Votes, actually. This is a special edition during the annual Lianghui 2019. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to our studio discussion here, gentlemen. I believe the general public, Chinese and foreign alike, must focus on the very important piece of legislation, the Foreign Investment Law Bill. What do you think of its chance of being approved? Foreigners would say, hey, this is likely to be rushed into action before the summit meeting. But as an expert of economics, what do you think of the impact of this law?
First of all, I think the chance of reaching an agreement regarding this law is very likely, because the idea of this law is very consistent with our government for a long time, and I think the enforcement process probably has some difference in different places, in different provinces. So I think the protection of property rights and the protection of the foreign ventures is our goal. So I think in that regard, so there's a consensus between the two governments. So I think this, if there's agreement, so I think this is going to be very optimistic for future increase of the collaborations between China and foreign ventures.
Zhiqin, do you agree that the protection of IP ownership will be the top priority on the agenda between the two sides, the Chinese and American delegations, about rebalancing the trade?
I think according to the information, I think this issue is one of the major key issues that between China and the United States, and also with the other countries, because the IP protection is not a problem of China, it's also a problem to the whole world. But this question become now emergency case. I think we need to solve this problem in a very urgent schedule. So not only because of the summit meeting, in the past 40 years we have already tried our best to safeguard and to protect all this IP from foreigners, but still we cannot meet the demand and the requirements from the Western countries. This is a big challenge for China. So that's why this session of the Congress meeting will take place, that will discuss on this issue. This will be a good and a very great step forward for China.
Politically, the urgency of the issue aside, let's take a closer look at the substance of the foreign investment law. For example, topping the law will be our concerns at the level of central government, that local authorities in China are likely to abuse or bend the law to suit their respective conditions so that they can attract more foreign investment. This has been a case, very embarrassing for both the Chinese central authorities and foreign investors. This time around, the law will stipulate clearly no such action will be allowed. Do you think execution of this first part of the law will be supervised by the Chinese and American side?
So I think that is probably the central disagreement between the two countries. I think as an independent country, China central government certainly may insist total enforcement by China, by Chinese legislation, by Chinese government. But I think because of the mutual mistrust, I think the U.S. side probably will insist a slightly different mechanism. For example, they will send someone here to supervise the enforcement. I think there will be a very serious disagreement between two countries.
To deal with a major power such as the United States, one got to be familiar with their way of thinking and even approach, such as the role of FBI in overseeing the process of fighting terrorism. They sent a special envoy to China who is stationed and deployed in the American embassy to make sure that things will happen in line with the American government. Do you think this is something that we have to keep in mind?
I think we have to be careful to follow all these examples or policies, that if these policies are made out by the United States, because their policies are always for the core interests of their own country and their own nation. We have some different explanation and interpretation or understandings of this law, of these policies. We have to do all these policies according to the Chinese customers and the Chinese culture, because we cannot always follow all these policies that are adopted by the Western countries that cannot work in China. It doesn't mean that China will be able or to like to violate international law, but we should have some law in accordance with the Chinese conditions.
But the frequent release of the presidential tweet by Donald Trump makes it very clear that China is more hungry for making a deal. In other words, President Trump says Beijing is very anxious and eager to get the job done and fix all the problems overnight. Let me cross over to Xiaoyu, who's standing by in Shanghai. Hello, Xiaoyu. What do you think of the second article in the foreign investment law, which focuses on the issue of coercive transfer of technology for bigger market shares in China? The United States has complained bitterly about this approach, the alleged coercive approach by the Chinese side for years. Do you think we're going to achieve a breakthrough this time around through the legislative deliberation in an NPC, the National People's Congress, an annual event in China, I mean in Beijing at this moment?
Yes, I got it. Actually, I think we will do something about that, because we already know that last year we opened another 22 area of the, I mean the further opening up to the foreign investors, such as the new type energy vehicles. Previously, we just used the joint ventures form to carry on such kind of the industry. But because of this trade tension, and we just still talking about we will further opening up, and especially in some very important area, especially service industry. So I think that we will maybe modify this law to allow more and more the United States and the other developing countries investment can they they got the full entity of their investment, such as you can see that the very famous automobile company, which is the Tesla, already run their full old branches in Shanghai. So I think it's because for a long time we just use this so-called the market trade for the technology, but now from now on we do change a lot.
Xiaoyu, how likely is it for both sides, the Chinese and American, to set up a joint supervisory mechanism to make sure that execution of the law will be complied with strictly at different levels of the Chinese economy? Because some Chinese observers are seriously concerned that this move, upon the request of the United States, threatens to violate the sovereignty of the Chinese nation state. Now, we don't know anything about what the red line would be like in the Chinese negotiations with the United States perhaps before the inking of the final agreement in Mar-a-Lago. But what's your take?
Yes, actually, it's a pretty hard part of the negotiation. We all know that we should do according to our law, but maybe the other part, the second part or third part, can provide some advice or surveillance about the progress of the whole things. I think maybe we will reach some deal, such as maybe for every quarters or half a year. So we set up the team and evaluate what happened in the past 3 or half years. So what we can achieve and what's the conflict between two parties. When we sit down and lay out all the possible outcome and finding out the solution to the problem and moving forward, something like that, I think. Yeah.
Right. It promises to be a long process, Yan Ze. Another controversial issue implied in this foreign investment law is how we look at the statute of Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Shall they be covered as the foreign companies, foreign business entities?
I think so far, yes, they are, and I think they will still likely to be, and I do think so. In this side, there will be very little space for China to make a very big change on that.
What do you think of the position of Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau according to the stipulations of this law?
I believe at this moment these 3 areas still belong to the so-called foreign entities, that because they have traditional conditions, traditional enforcement of the foreign laws in this area. They know much better about the international law. They are well recognized also by the international market. So this is a good also advantage for the mainland market. So I think it's better to keep these 3 areas still as foreign entities. That's much better for China. It's also a good window, a good access for mainland to go abroad. So also they can gather more information and experiences what the foreign laws and the foreign companies are willing to improve their business atmosphere, business conditions. This is also good, positive for the mainland companies here.
Let me go back to Xiaoyu. Another vocal point for the bilateral discussions concerning the prospects of the trade talk is negative list. Now, overseas companies really hope to enjoy free access to market shares, particularly service industry in this country. But why do we insist that the negative list be preserved until a certain point in the future when a complete and comprehensive agreement will be reached to lift all the barriers?
Yeah, I think because we are talking about opening up, further opening up to the overseas investor, because you know some some areas such as the service industry, education, and medical service usually are not open to the foreign investors. So I think this kind of service industry will be the most profitable, and especially for the advantage economy. They will have very strong service industry company. They want to opening up further. For example, the telecommunication network and the education, high level education, something like that. I think because they can get great money from that, so they need us to open the market. So, but we think it's a challenge as well as opportunity. Well, the reason is quite simple, because we already worrying about this education, medical service for years. So if we can absorb the how can I say, the best practice from the overseas investor, why we do that? Okay, such as we enter into the WTO 20 years before, because we worrying about manufacturing industry, but you can see that made in China doing pretty good nowadays. So I think the further opening up for the service industry will be very good signal as well as challenge to us all, especially very good for our consumers.
Shao Yu, where exactly do you stand on this issue? The foreign investment law draft clearly says that China's foreign investment shall be subject to the pre-entry national treatment plus negative list management system. And the case-by-case approval management mode shall be abolished, according to Mr. Zhang Yeshui, spokesperson of the Lianghui.
Yes, basically I think is because the further opening up means that we'll be equally treat the overseas investor and the domestic investors. So I think it's pretty much if we do have the negative list, okay, the negative list, some areas such as national security cannot put money into, put your investment in that. You know, besides, I expect that this area, other things, either whether you are the domestic investor or foreign investor, you can do the same thing by the same law. I think that is very important, yeah.
Yan Sir, what do you think of the alleged disadvantages of the past case-by-case approval management mode?
Certainly, that case-to-case mode means low efficiency. And sometimes there are a lot of so-called red tapes, so that can slow the whole process. Certainly, the American side wants the total solution of the whole system, so that so all these cases can be approved naturally. But in China, you know, as we said in the very beginning, if this goes to case, maybe the approval process is administered by local government. So there will be a lot of variations. Certainly, I think that's the concern. But on China side, service sector is different from manufacturing sector. It is not only about profits. It's also about ideology. It's about a lot of things. So I think in China side, we probably prefer a case-by-case. So I think that's the key difference.
Zhiqin, we've had a stormy year last year about the relationship between the government and the SOE. The US side insists that all subsidies be stopped for Chinese players so that we enjoy real level playing field. And we've heard some discussions about possible concessions that the Chinese government is likely to make. For example, we're going to provide all players, Chinese and foreign alike, with the same subsidies. But it sounds a little bit ridiculous compared to our previous policy.
I think subsidies is a universal tool for all countries, not only China. I think we learned a lot from the United States, from Western countries, because they subsidized many products. Even in recent years, the last year, Trump also subsidized the farmers in the United States to deal with China's trade tension. This is equal or this is unequal? This is fair or unfair? He didn't give the answer, but everybody knows. When we are talking China's subsidies, we have to see that from policymakers, we should not, or we should stop subsidies to support the exporters, that to give more products in a lower price, and the government subsidize the price differences. This is maybe could be eliminated to make a good and a fair conditions for products to export. So I think this is only one point. That's why I said we have always different understandings and interpretation. We have to adopt the policy according to the Chinese market. But of course, the international market is willing to have no subsidies or subsidy-free products. But this is not possible.
Let me go back to Shao Yu. We've had rounds and rounds of strategic and economic dialogue, or BIT negotiations, with the United States, and the United States has launched anti-dumping, anti-subsidy investigations to set up trade barriers, visible and invisible alike. Now, this time around, the United States wants to fix the problem once and for all, using the punitive tariffs as a threat. So what do you think of, for example, China's status as a developing country? And this is clearly implied in our negotiations many years ago when China was to enter into the WTO. China was indeed accepted as a developing country, has subsidies for some industries in China, were accepted as a kind of transitional period, or if not a grace period.
Yes. Actually, it's a really argued point, because the United States think that China is very big and very strong. So let's say that China already graduated from the WTO. Pretty much, you must play the game like a developed country. But the truth is, you can look at it, GDP per capita. So you can see that maybe around range from the, I think, ranking around 80, 87, something like that. So it's still poor, considering the GDP per capita. Yes, we still have some very good technology such as 5G and IoT, but you take a look at the general level of the manufacturing industry. We still manufacture a lot of things that low-valued things. So, of course, it's about the profit. Everybody will argue about that. If you just allow China stay like the developing countries, so everything would be, how can I say, be cheaper, but you still get bigger and bigger market share. The United States don't like it for sure, because they will think that they will cap their profit from the old company. But thing is, I think, from the point of I guess, we think, yes, after 20 years entering the WTO, we do learn a lot of things. We do get some progress. So maybe at that kind of, how can I say, we have reached a point which we will maybe raise a little bit from the developing area, but maybe a little bit less developed, such as the US and the UN. But it's about how can I say, it's out of trade. So we must make some point, make some deal. So must be some kind of negotiation, and we will cut some, we will give some profits, and they will allow we do that. So it's a very, kind of say, it's pretty hard argue points, but we think that if we can make some progress, if we can contribute some profit to the overseas investors, so the WTO may be survived.
Reform of the WTO is indeed prioritized on the agenda of the EU, United States and China. Let's take a closer look at domestic and homegrown problems, such as access to loans for the SME, the private economy. Many are still recovering from the aftershocks of a nosedive in the stock market, following the government high-handed crackdown on P2P things. What do you think of, say, the prevention of financial risks? This is one of the three major tasks on the agenda of President Xi Jinping, other than complete the poverty alleviation as well as environmental protection.
Mm-hmm. I think to the general public, the financial crisis probably means crash of the stock market, and everyone loses money. But to the government, a financial crisis actually means if the leverage goes too high, then we probably will see the failures of financial institutions. And this will lead to very serious problems of the whole society, credit crunch, things like that. So I think the government has made a lot of efforts in trying to lower down the leverage ratio, and we now have the consensus among the government. I'm not sure among the public, but the government reaches the conclusion saying that the leverage ratio is relatively stable now. So I think financial crisis means the leverage ratio. But my standard view is that China is slightly different from the other countries, particularly the Western countries, because the state has a very strong power of coordination the financial institutions. So we should be relatively, I think we should be relatively calm about the current situation. I think as long as we can keep a relatively stable leverage ratio, I think we are still fine with the financial crisis.
What do you think of the impact of the required reserve ratio to release liquidity? Will that help the rebound, a modest one, in the stock market?
Actually, this release of the RRI is something very usual, and also in some special cases that the central government can have such a policy to provide more liquidity. But also another purpose is also from the central bank is also want to take and withdraw money and the currency from the market, also to hold this market in the security. In this way that they have both impact and functions by taking such actions. Actually, first is cautious for the financial market, give the confidence to the local bankers that they have enough liquidity to provide the loans and the financial support to the market. The second is also they should be aware that to make more reserve, more secure, that to safeguard the stability of the financial market. So I think the function can be done, can be seen from both sides. We cannot always say that again, central bank gives more liquidity. Now the market have the more money to invest in somewhere. That will make the market confused. This is not good thing. But the People's Bank, I think, has very clear-cut policy makings in this area.
Given the double adversity of both structural and cyclical problems that the Chinese economy is facing, what do you think of the issue of confidence? Without much of the confidence that is badly needed, for example, for investment, the issue of innovation will get nowhere, and the issue of employment will become a top concern for politicians in the year 2019.
I think in terms of the confidence, there's long-run confidence, there's short-run confidence. So long-run confidence, we see China, after 40 years of reform and open up, we have built a very solid ground of manufacturing sectors. And also, I'm very confident about the process of innovation. So in the long run, I think the confidence is very high. But I think recently people's concern is short-run confidence about for example, too aggressive deleverage policies, and also about some concerns regarding the status of the private economy. So I think this is something the state should notice, should make efforts to correct. But overall speaking, if we take a long-run view, I say that most of the people are still confident about Chinese economy. That means they also includes the foreign investors. I met a lot of foreign investors. I think generally they are still confident in the long run.
President Xi Jinping said that 6 major factors of destabilization are likely to plague the Chinese economy. Topping the list is, of course, unemployment, and the second, financial risks. So the last is the management of expectations. So what do you think of the impact of the 6 factors?
The 6 factors, the most important thing is the stability of the employment. At the moment in China, we have a big burden that the unemployment, because every year we have new graduates. 8 million is also the population of one European country. And the second, also some people also lose their jobs and change their jobs. I think every year there are more than 10 million people that need new jobs. This is really a good, heavy challenge for the government. So I mean that the 6 factors, this one is really very poor, very important for the central government.
We keep our fingers crossed for a solution to be submitted by People's Deputies of this annual legislative session in Beijing, Lianghui. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time for Voices and Votes, our special edition of Dialogue. Until then, goodbye.